The auctioneer's gavel came down on the old Farmall H for $350. I was the only bidder. Everyone else at the estate sale was looking at the newer equipment, the tractors from the 60s and 70s that still had value, still had power, still could work a modern farm. I saw something different. I saw opportunity. My name is Marcus Webb. This was 2004. I was 26 years old with a business degree I'd never used, and $40,000 I'd borrowed from everyone who'd take my calls, my parents, my uncle, 2 former college roommates, even convinced my grandmother to co-sign a loan. Everyone thought I was crazy, told me farming was dying, told me small operations couldn't compete, told me corporate agriculture had won, and there was no point trying to fight it. They were right about one thing. Small farming, the traditional way, was dying. But I wasn't planning to farm the traditional way. I was planning to buy every failing farm in the county, one by one, piece by piece, until I owned enough land that I became the thing everyone said couldn't exist anymore. A farming empire built from the bottom up instead of handed down or corporate-backed. That $350 Farmall H was just the beginning. The farm that tractor came from was the Henderson place. 200 acres on the east side of the county. The old man, Robert Henderson, had died at 87, heart attack, while checking fence lines. His kids didn't want it. 3 children, all in their 50s and 60s, all lived in cities, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Atlanta, had careers in healthcare and finance and technology, saw the farm as an obligation they couldn't wait to escape, an anchor tying them to a past they deliberately left behind. They wanted it sold fast and were willing to take less than market value to make it happen. I could see it in their eyes at the estate sale, the way they looked at the land like it was a burden instead of a legacy, the way they whispered to each other about getting this over with, the way they checked their phones constantly, wanting to be anywhere but there. I approached them after the auction, introduced myself, told them I was interested in buying the land, all of it, the whole operation. They looked at me like I was young and stupid, which I was, young anyway, but not stupid. I'd done my homework, knew what they wanted, knew what I could offer. "What can you offer?" the oldest son asked. His name was David. He was 58 years old, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit anymore. Had the look of someone who'd gained weight sitting at a desk. Uncomfortable being back in farm country. Uncomfortable wearing boots instead of dress shoes. Uncomfortable with everything about this situation. "I can offer you a clean sale in 30 days, cash. No financing contingencies. No inspections beyond basic title work. You want to be done with this place, I'll make you done with it. You can be back in Cleveland by the end of next month, never having to think about it again." His sister Rebecca perked up at that. She was the middle child, had been the most vocal about wanting to sell quickly. She said, "How much are you offering?" I named a number I'd calculated carefully. $160,000 for 200 acres and all equipment. 20% below market value based on recent comparable sales. But market value assumed someone actually wanted to farm it. Who wanted to farm anymore? Young people were leaving rural areas for cities. Old people were dying. The market for small farms was collapsing in real time. There were a dozen other farms for sale within 30 miles. My offer was low, but it was real. It was immediate, and it was certain. "That's insulting," David said. "This land has been in our family for 3 generations. Dad worked it his whole life. You're offering less than what the timber alone is worth." I stayed calm. "Mr. Henderson, with respect, that land has been on the market for 4 months. How many other offers have you received? Any offers at all? He didn't answer, because the answer was no. Nobody wanted small farms anymore. Not at any price that made sense to the sellers, I continued. You can wait for a better offer. Hold out for market value. But every month you wait, you're paying property taxes, insurance, maintenance, opportunity cost on capital that's tied up, and every month that farm sits idle, losing value. Or you can accept my offer today and move on with your lives. The youngest son, Michael, said something then that sealed the deal. He said, Dad would have wanted the land to go to someone who'd farm it, not sit empty, not get developed. This kid says he'll farm it. Maybe that's worth something. They talked among themselves for 10 minutes. Finally, David said, We'll take your offer, but we want the closing done in 3 weeks, not 4, and you pay all closing costs. Done, I said. We shook hands right there in the Henderson farmhouse kitchen, where Robert Henderson had eaten breakfast for 60 years, where his father had eaten before him, where his grandfather had started the whole thing in 1924. All that history changing hands for $160,000. I used my entire $40,000 as down payment, 10%, financed the rest with a land contract directly with the family. Traditional bank financing was impossible. I had no credit history, no farming experience, no collateral beyond the land itself. Banks wouldn't touch me, but the Henderson family was so eager to be rid of it, they gave me terms a bank never would. 6% interest, 15-year amortization, balloon payment in 5 years. They thought I'd default before the balloon came due, thought they'd get the land back and could resell it, but I had different plans. I moved onto that farm in July 2004. The farmhouse was livable but outdated. Kitchen from the 1960s, bathroom fixtures from the 1970s, carpet that should have been replaced a decade ago, but it had running water and electricity and a roof that didn't leak. That was enough. I wasn't there for comfort. I was there to build something. I farmed with equipment that was older than I was. That $300-N-50 Farmall H became my main tractor. Also inherited a 1955 John Deere Model 60, a 1963 International 706, and various implements from different eras. A combine from 1968 that barely ran, planters and plows and cultivators that should have been in a museum, but they worked, barely, and barely was enough. But here's what nobody understood. I didn't need new equipment. I didn't need efficiency per acre. I needed cheap equipment that worked well enough to get crops in the ground and harvested. Because I wasn't trying to maximize yield per acre like traditional farmers. I was trying to maximize profit per dollar invested. Big difference. I farmed that 200 acres as cheaply as humanly possible. Corn and soybeans in rotation. Nothing fancy, nothing specialty. Minimum inputs, no till where I could get away with it. Used the cheapest seed varieties. Minimal fertilizer. Spot-treated weeds instead of blanket spraying. Did all my own labor. Lived on almost nothing. Rice and beans for dinner most nights. Didn't go to town unless necessary. Didn't date because dating costs money. Had exactly one goal. Save every dollar. Reinvest everything into one thing. More land. That first year, I cleared $18,000 after expenses. Not a lot, but I lived on $6,000 and banked $12,000. Year 2, I cleared $23,000, lived on $7,000, banked $16,000, building a war chest for the next acquisition. The Bradshaw farm came up for sale in January 2005, 350 acres. on the west side of the county, family farm for 4 generations going back to 1894. Current owner was Tom Bradshaw, 73 years old, couldn't do it anymore. His son Michael had been killed in Iraq in 2003. Marine Corps. Roadside bomb outside Fallujah. Tom had been planning to pass the farm to Michael, had been teaching him, training him, preparing him. Then one day he got a visit from 2 Marines in dress uniforms, and his entire plan for the future died with his son. Tom's other kids had no interest. Daughter was a nurse in Pennsylvania. Other son was a software engineer in California. Neither wanted to farm. Neither could farm even if they wanted to. Tom tried for a year to keep going, but at 73, with no help, it was impossible. Put it up for sale in late 2004. Asked $350,000, fair price for the time, but nobody was buying. I made an offer in February 2005, $210,000, 40% below asking. I knew it was insulting. Knew Tom would probably tell me to leave, but I also knew nobody else was making any offers at all. The market was what the market was. Tom called me some things I won't repeat. Told me to get off his property. Told me I had no respect for what farming meant. Told me I was the problem with the younger generation. Entitled, greedy, willing to profit from other people's pain. I listened, didn't argue. Told him my offer stood if circumstances changed. Then I left. 3 months later he called me. Equipment had broken down. Major repair needed on his combine. Would cost $15,000 he didn't have. Couldn't harvest without it. Couldn't afford the repair. Couldn't afford to replace it. Banks wouldn't lend to a 73-year-old farmer with no succession plan. He was trapped. Would I reconsider my offer? Could I go higher? I went up 10%, $231,000. Still 34% below his asking price. Take it or leave it. He took it. What choice did he have? Hold on to land he couldn't farm and watch it sit idle, losing value every year? Or take my offer and at least have cash to retire on, to help his remaining kids, to set something aside for grandchildren? We closed in July 2005. I bought 350 acres for $231,000. Financed again, with seller financing, since banks still wouldn't touch me. Tom made me sign the papers in front of a lawyer. Wanted everything documented. Wanted to make sure I couldn't back out. Wanted it official that his family's farm was now mine. After we signed, he sat there for a minute just staring at the papers. Then he said, I thought Michael would farm this someday. Thought he'd bring his kids here. Thought the farm would go on. Now it goes to you. A stranger who didn't work for it, didn't earn it. Just bought it cheap because I was desperate. I could have let that go, could have taken the insult and moved on, but something made me push back. I said, Mr. Bradshaw, I'm sorry about your son. I truly am, but me buying this land isn't why he died. Isn't why your other kids didn't want to farm. Isn't why you couldn't keep going at 73. Those are life circumstances, tragedies, realities. I didn't create them. I'm just operating in the world as it exists. And in this world, I made you an offer that keeps this land as farmland. You accepted because it was your best option. That's not me taking advantage. That's just business. He looked at me with something like hatred, something like respect. Hard to tell which. Finally he said, You're right. Doesn't mean I have to like it. Doesn't mean I have to like you. Fair enough, I said. You don't have to like me. You just have to cash my checks. That was the beginning of my reputation. The kid who buys desperate farmers' land for cheap. The vulture, the opportunist, the one who profits from others' pain. People started talking. Coffee shop gossip, church parking lot whispers, county board meetings where my name came up. Not favorably, but here's what they couldn't dispute. Every farm I bought stayed a farm. I didn't subdivide, didn't sell to developers, didn't let it sit idle. I farmed it. Maybe not the way they'd farmed it, maybe not with the same equipment or methods or philosophy. But the land stayed in agricultural production. That had to count for something. Year 2, I bought 4 more farms, small ones, 100 to 200 acres each, all from elderly farmers with no succession plans, all below market value, all financed creatively because banks still wouldn't touch me. I was too young, too leveraged, too risky, but I had something banks didn't understand. I had timing. The agricultural economy was shifting. Small farms were becoming unprofitable for traditional operators. The older generation was dying off. The younger generation didn't want to farm. There was a gap, a window where land was cheap because nobody wanted it. I wanted it, all of it. By 2007, I owned 1,400 acres across 7 different properties. Farming it all with the same collection of ancient equipment, spending almost nothing on inputs, hiring seasonal workers for harvest instead of owning expensive combines, running the entire operation on a shoestring budget focused on one metric: cash flow for more land purchases. The farmers who'd sold to me watched me succeed and felt conflicted, happy to have cash from land they couldn't farm, resentful that I was making it work when they couldn't, angry that I'd bought at prices that felt like theft. Tom Bradshaw, the man I'd bought those 350 acres from, stopped me at the co-op one morning. He said, "You knew I was desperate. You knew I had no options. You took advantage of that." I didn't disagree with him. I said, "I made an offer you were free to refuse. You accepted because it was better than your alternatives. That's business. I'm not a charity. I'm building something." "What are you building?" "Taking farms away from families who built them. I'm keeping that land in production." "You weren't farming it. You couldn't. Your son died and you had no one to pass it to. That land would have sat idle or been sold to developers. I'm farming it, employing people, growing food. How is that worse?" He didn't have an answer for that, walked away angry, but he couldn't argue the fundamental point. The land was being farmed, food was being grown. The farms weren't becoming subdivisions. The recession in 2008 hit rural areas hard. Credit dried up completely. Commodity prices dropped 30% in 6 months. Farmers who'd been barely holding on with equipment, loans, and operating credit suddenly couldn't get financing. Banks that had been lending aggressively pulled back, called in loans, refused to renew credit lines, forced liquidations. Farms went into foreclosure at a rate nobody had seen since the 1980s crisis. Every week, another auction notice in the county newspaper. Another family losing everything. Another generation of farming ending not by choice, but by financial catastrophe. I was waiting for this, had been preparing for 3 years, while other farmers had been upgrading equipment and expanding operations on credit. I'd been saving, living lean, building cash reserves, keeping debt minimal, maintaining relationships with the few lenders who'd work with me, positioning myself for exactly this moment. When everyone else was desperate, I had cash, had credit, had the ability to move fast. The Jameson farm was the first. 580 acres. Bank foreclosure. Family had owned it since 1923. Current owner, Rick Jameson, was 45 years old, had expanded aggressively in 2006 and 2007 when credit was easy and commodity prices were high, bought new equipment, new trucks, built a new barn, all financed, all leveraged. When prices crashed and credit disappeared, he couldn't make payments, bank foreclosed, auctioned everything. I bought the land at auction for $190,000, less than $330 per acre. The equipment alone was probably worth more than that. But nobody else was bidding. Nobody else had cash. The bank just wanted it off their books. Rick Jameson was there at the auction. Had to be. Bank required it. I watched him watch his family's land sell for a fraction of what it was worth. Watched him realize he'd lost everything. Watched him understand that decades of his family's work was over. I went up to him afterward, wasn't gloating, wasn't celebrating, just wanted to say something. Told him I was sorry it worked out this way. Told him I'd keep the land in production. Told him if he ever wanted to come see what I was doing with it, he was welcome. He looked at me with eyes that were completely dead. Said, "You're not sorry. You waited for this. You planned for this. You wanted farms to fail so you could buy them cheap. Don't pretend you care." He wasn't completely wrong. I had waited, had planned, had positioned myself to take advantage of a crisis. But I hadn't caused the crisis, hadn't made the banks lend recklessly, hadn't made farmers overextend. I just recognized an opportunity and had the resources to act on it. The Wilson farm came next. 320 acres, another foreclosure. The Martinez place after that, 400 acres. Then the Crawford farm, the Porter property, the Reynolds land. 9 farms total in 2008 and 2009, bought at foreclosure auctions or direct from banks desperate to clear bad loans. Added 3,200 acres to my operation. Paid an average of $400 per acre. Market value at the time was probably $700 per acre. But there was no market, just desperate sellers and one buyer with cash. Some people called me a vulture, said I was profiting from others' misery, said I was destroying the fabric of the rural community, said I should be ashamed. Maybe I should have been. Maybe there was something morally wrong with what I was doing. But here's what I kept coming back to. Those farms were going to be sold regardless of whether I bought them or not. Banks were going to foreclose. Families were going to lose their land. That was happening with or without me. The only question was who would buy the land and what they'd do with it. If I didn't buy it, someone else would. Maybe another farmer. Maybe an investment group. Maybe a developer who'd subdivide it. At least with me, the land stayed farmland, stayed in production, continued its original purpose. Was that rationalization? Probably. But it was also true. The county newspaper ran an editorial about me in late 2009. Titled it, "The Problem with Opportunism in Agriculture." Didn't name me directly, but everyone knew who they meant. Talked about the importance of community, about farming being more than business, about how treating land acquisition like corporate raiding was destroying the character of rural life. I read that editorial 3 times. Trying to decide if I cared what they thought, trying to decide if they had a point. Finally decided that their opinion didn't change reality. I was playing by the rules as they existed, making offers sellers accepted, operating legally and above board. If people didn't like the outcomes, that wasn't my problem to solve. But I did start thinking about legacy. About what I was building and how it would be remembered. About whether being successful meant anything if everyone hated you for it. By 2010, I owned 4,200 acres, the largest single farming operation in the county. And I'd done it with mostly ancient equipment and aggressive land acquisition during market downturns. That's when I started upgrading, bought modern tractors, efficient combines, precision agriculture, technology, finally had the scale to justify the investment. The old Farmall H that started everything got retired to a place of honor in my machinery shed. People's attitudes started shifting. The farmers who'd sold to me were mostly retired or dead. The younger generation saw me differently. Saw someone their age who'd built something from nothing, who'd taken risks and won, who'd figured out how to make farming work in an era when everyone said it couldn't be done. Banks that had refused me loans now competed for my business. Equipment dealers who'd ignored me now gave me priority service. Coop managers who'd been dismissive now treated me with respect. Success changes everything, but not everyone was happy. The remaining small farmers watched me with suspicion, saw me as a threat, saw my success as proof they were failing. Some of that was fair. I was farming land they used to farm, land their families had worked for generations, land that now had my name on the deed. Bill Matthews farmed 400 acres adjacent to 3 of my properties. He was in his 60s, stubborn, proud, refusing to sell even though he was struggling, even though it made financial sense to liquidate and retire. He kept farming because it was who he was, because Matthews had farmed that land since 1887, and he wasn't going to be the one who ended it. His equipment kept breaking down. Old tractors, like the ones I'd started with, but unlike me, he didn't have the cash flow to keep them running. He'd come to the Coop looking for credit to buy parts, getting turned down, getting further behind. I approached him one morning, told him I wanted to buy his land, offered him market value, actually offered him above market value. He'd treated me fairly when I was starting out, never talked down about me, never called me a vulture. I respected that. He looked at me for a long time, then he said, "I appreciate the offer, I do, but I can't sell. This land is who I am, what my family built. If I sell, I'm just another old farmer who gave up." "You're not giving up. You're retiring after 50 years of hard work. There's honor in that, maybe, but it still feels like losing." I understood that. Understood it more than he knew. My father had been a small business owner, run a machine shop for 30 years, lost everything in the recession of 2001, watched his life's work get liquidated for parts, died of a heart attack 6 months later at 53 years old. I'd watched what losing does to a man. That's part of why I'd built what I built, so I'd never be in a position where someone could take from me what my father had taken from him, so I'd never feel that powerlessness. Bill Matthews held on for 2 more years. Then his main tractor threw a rod and the repair cost more than the tractor was worth. He couldn't afford to fix it, couldn't afford to replace it, couldn't farm without it. He called me, asked if my offer still stood. I told him it did. We closed the sale in 3 weeks. He cried when he signed the papers. Not because the price was unfair, because it was over. His family's connection to that land was over. I gave him something the papers didn't require. Told him he could stay in his house as long as he wanted, rent-free. His wife was in poor health. Moving would be hard on her. I didn't need the house, had my own. It was the right thing to do. He looked at me surprised, said, "Why would you do that?" "Because you treated me with respect when nobody else did. Because losing the farm is punishment enough without losing your home too. Because I can afford the gesture and you've earned it." We shook hands. He stayed in that house until his wife died 3 years later. Then he moved to be near his daughter. But those 3 years mattered, gave him dignity, Gave him time to adjust. Cost me nothing that mattered. By 2014 I owned 5,700 acres. The biggest farm in the county by far. Second biggest was less than 3,000. I'd done in 10 years what people said was impossible. Built a major agricultural operation from basically nothing in an era when farming was supposed to be dying. How did I do it? Started with one old Farmall H and $350. Bought cheap land when others couldn't or wouldn't. Farmed lean when others farmed traditionally. Saved aggressively when others spent. Bought during downturns when others panicked. Upgraded when I had scale. Treated people fairly but never confused fairness with charity. Some people still call me a vulture. Still resent what I built. Still think I took advantage of desperate farmers. Maybe there's truth in that. I bought land from people who had no better options. Paid prices below what they wished they could get. Profited from their inability to continue. But here's what's also true. That land is still farmland. Still producing food. Still employing people. Still maintaining the agricultural character of this county. It didn't become strip malls or subdivisions. It didn't sit idle. It's being used for what it was meant for. Is that redemption? Is that justification? I don't know. What I know is I built something real, something lasting, something that provides for my family and employs dozens of people and keeps thousands of acres in production. The old Farmall H sits in my main machinery shed. Restored now, painted, maintained. Doesn't work anymore, but represents everything I built. Reminds me where I started. Reminds me that opportunities exist in the gaps between what was and what's coming. That timing and courage and willingness to act when others hesitate can build empires from scrap metal. I started with one old Farmall. 10 years later, I owned the biggest farm in the county. Did it by being smarter, faster, and more ruthless than anyone thought a 26-year-old with borrowed money could be. Some people build slow and steady. Some people inherit and maintain. I built fast and aggressive by seeing opportunity where others saw decline. That's the difference between those who succeed and those who don't. Not morality, not fairness, not playing by rules everyone agrees on. Success comes from seeing what others miss and having the courage to act on it. 10 years, one old tractor to 5,700 acres. That's my story. Make of it what you will.